who's actually going to get the most out of the Panasonic LUMIX 5 4K mirrorless, and who should walk away before they click add to cart? That's the question I hear the most when I'm scrolling through camera forums and watching people wrestle with the same dilemma. Do I need a full-frame body that promises cinema-grade video? Or am I just paying for a badge that will sit on a shelf while I chase something more practical? If you're on the fence, you're probably wondering if the price tag makes sense for a normal everyday buyer who shoots a mix of family events, travel vlogs, and maybe the occasional indie short. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Let's start with the biggest source of hesitation I've seen, the learning curve. Full-frame mirrorless systems are notorious for menus that feel like a maze, especially if you're coming from a point-and-shoot or a compact system. The LUMIX S5 isn't immune to that. Its menu hierarchy is deep, and the joystick-driven controls can feel a bit cramped when you're trying to switch settings on the fly. That said, the camera does make a genuine effort to keep the most common shooting functions within thumb reach. ISO, white balance, and focus mode are all accessible without diving into nested pages. If you've already spent time with any Panasonic L-mount lens, you'll recognize the layout and the transition will be smoother. Beginners who have never touched a DSLR might find the initial setup a bit overwhelming, but the built-in tutorials and the help icon overlay make the first few shoots less intimidating than they could be. Autofocus confidence is where the S5 starts to separate itself from the crowd. Panasonic's depth from defocus (DFD) system combines data from both the sensor and the lens to predict focus distance, which translates into surprisingly quick lock-on times for a full-frame sensor. In real-world street photography, that means you can raise your hand, point, and capture a fleeting expression without hunting for focus. For video creators, the contrast detect AF works smoothly when you're panning a handheld shot, the focus rarely jerks, and you can rely on face detect to stay locked on a speaking subject. The only wrinkle I've noticed is that in very low-light scenes, think a dimly lit jazz club or a midnight cityscape, the DFD system can occasionally hunt for a second before it settles. If you plan on shooting consistently in sub-5 stop conditions, you may want to pair the S5 with a fast prime, f/1.4 to f/2, to give the AF a brighter target. Low-light behavior is another practical concern. The S5 sensor delivers clean images up to ISO 6400, and the noise is comparable to other full-frame contenders in that range. On a rainy evening in Barcelona, I shot a portrait at ISO 3200 with a 35mm pancake lens. The result was a nicely rendered skin tone with just a hint of grain, nothing you couldn't clean up in post. The real advantage shows up when you push the ISO to 12,800 for a concert or a nightclub. The dynamic range drops, but the tonal roll-off remains pleasant, and the built-in image stabilization helps keep handheld shots shake-free. If you are a filmmaker who needs to shoot on the fly with minimal lighting, the S5 will give you the latitude to stay inside the sensor's sweet spot without cranking up the gain too far. Speaking of stabilization, the S5 includes a 5-axis in-body image stabilization (IBIS) that works hand-in-hand with Panasonic's OIS lenses. In practice, the combination lets you get away with slower shutter speeds down to 1/30 SEC while still producing crisp stills when you're walking or on a moving platform. For vloggers, that means smoother handheld video without the need for a gimbal for most casual situations. The only scenario where IBIS falls short is when you're using a very long telephoto lens, 200mm+. The stabilization range doesn't fully compensate for the additional shake, so you might still need a tripod or monopod for those extreme focal lengths. Now, the lens ecosystem. Panasonic's L-mount is still growing, but it's far from barren. You have access to a solid selection of native lenses from Panasonic and Olympus wide-angle primes, standard zooms, and a few fast apertures. What you won't find are as many third-party options as you'd see for Sony's mount, but the adapters on the market are reliable and let you use legacy lenses from other mounts, including classic Leica M lenses. In everyday use, the native 2470mm f/2.8 works beautifully for travel and event shooting, offering the flexibility to step from wide scenes to intimate portraits without swapping glass. If you're a hobbyist looking to build a collection over time, the price point of these lenses is reasonable, and the future-proof nature of the L-mount means you won't feel locked out as new optics are released. Battery confidence is a surprisingly practical factor that often gets overlooked. The S5 uses a 7.2V 1860 mAh battery, which in my tests lasted about 380 shots when shooting stills in a normal lighting environment, and roughly 80 minutes of continuous 4K video.